Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to the 47 Driver YouTube channel. I'm an active duty CH-47 pilot in the US military. I fly the Fox model. Taking a look at the Miltech Simulations CH-47 Delta that just released recently. I'm going to give you guys my thoughts on it. Do kind of some talking about systems, functionality and stuff like that. It's going to be kind of a longer video. If you want to see more of this kind of stuff, I'll be doing plenty more when the Fox model comes out for DCS soon. I'm not a huge Microsoft Flight Sim guy, especially with helicopters. I'm usually just flying airliners if I'm playing this, and I'm certainly not a content creator, so please forgive any weirdness that may happen. But yeah, let's get into it. I'll start with the external model here. It looks okay. A little cartoonish in my opinion. It just doesn't look right. I'm not really sure. Yeah, I mean, it's passable. It's okay. And once again, this is a Delta model, so there are going to be some differences between this and what I fly. I've never flown a Delta model. But it's mostly the same, just minus some fancy avionics that we have in the Fox model. So yeah, just looking, continuing on the external model here. A couple things I've noticed: these searchlights, it might just be a limitation of the sim, but they're not fixed forward in the real aircraft. They kind of stow back here in the nose section, and then you slew them and extend them outward, slew them around via the thrust lever, which we'll get to in a moment. The default settings of the aircraft have the center cargo hook and the rescue door stowed. We don't generally do that. There should be 3 hooks right here. The center hook is the big one. We can unstow that later. No line of sight blockers on the combining transmission area or the forward pylon, which is something that most Chinooks would have. Continuing, just a little weird placement on the battery and the electrical compartment doors here. They're a little bit more forward on the fuel pods in the real aircraft, but it's a pretty minor thing. There's no high freak antenna installed on the side of this aircraft. I don't know if that's something I can configure, or I'm pretty sure Delta models still had that. It's a big black antenna that fits on the number 1 side. It looks kind of like a ladder. It's for the high freak radio. I do not know which engines they're attempting to model here. I think these are the 714 alphas. They should be. And we'll talk more on that later during the startup sequence, but I have a couple issues with the startup sequence here. I've played around with this a little bit. This tail number, kind of cool little fact here, 1408167 is a real CH-47 Fox model tail number, and it is one that I fly pretty regularly, so that is pretty cool. It's a real aircraft. It is a Fox model though, not a Delta model. The way the blades kind of sit, I mean, they're very rigid. It looks like you'll see quite a bit more flex in the real Chinook blades. They weigh about 350 pounds apiece and about 40 feet long. They bow downward a little bit when it's at rest here. And this aft blade being over the tunnel cover area where the drive shafts are is not ideal for startup, and also it would not be pointing upward like that at all. It sits kind of more down here, but yeah, I mean, that's about it with the external model. It's pretty good. It's passable, like I said. We'll talk through some of the things here on the aircraft. CH-47 has 2 turboshaft engines, produce about 5,000 horsepower apiece, for a total of about 10,000 shaft horsepower. No tail rotor means no drivetrain loss in power. All your thrust inputs go directly to the engines and to the rotors. Extremely powerful aircraft, obviously extremely stable. Tandem rotor design. These These rotors rotate opposite of each other, which counteract any sort of anti-torque that helicopters are known for. So therefore there's not a lot of pedal input required in the Chinook, and we generally don't touch the pedals very often, especially on the ground. That can kill you. I'll talk more about that later. But so we got the engines out of the way. We have 5 transmissions on the CH-47. Connected to the aft head is the aft transmission, including the aft shaft. Right here is in the forward part of the aft pylon is the combining transmission. That's what kind of meshes everything together. That's the important one. That's what keeps the rotor blades, the 2 heads, in sync with each other. It's connected via 9 drive shafts or sync shafts that run in this area here called the tunnel cover. And then moving up here, we have the forward transmission on the forward head. Sits right above the cockpit. It's very loud. And then a engine transmission on the front of each engine, also known as a nose gear box on some helicopters. Yep, 5 transmissions, a lot going on. A lot of things have to work properly to keep these rotors synced, so they don't, the aircraft doesn't have a mid-air collision with itself. Probably the only aircraft in the world that can do that is the Chinook. Talking a little bit about the rotor heads themselves. They did an okay job here. Things look a little disproportionate, kind of small. This area that connects to the vertical hinge pin here on the blades is much beefier in the real aircraft. That looks very kind of skinny and weird. They didn't put a whole lot of detail into the heads either. They did just kind of enough to get the message across, but like I said, vertical hinge pin here, and the shock absorber here. So that's not really what it looks like. It's much bigger than that. It allows for the blades to lead and lag. Pitch varying housing is right here. Kind of allows for some pitch changes in the blades using a torsion strap in there of layered steel. This is the horizontal hinge pin, which allows the blades to flap and feather up and down. All connected here at the main I can't think of the word right now. The main oil reservoir, there we go, is on the top right there, and connects everything together. Your pitch change links are attached to the pitch horns. Here, those don't really look very good, but that's okay. We also have lightning straps, which are kind of, I guess, annotated by these. It's not what they look like, but they kind of wrap around the blades here and continue down the blade a ways. Like I said, the blades weigh about 350 pounds apiece. Fully articulated rotor system, flap, feather, lead, lag. We'll talk more about this later, but it's not really depicted too well here. It is on the forward system. There's a bit of rigging, forward tilt involved in the rigging here of the CH-47 to allow for ground taxi without having to touch the flight controls. You got 9 degrees on the forward head, 4 degrees on the aft head. Forward. Basically that just allows you to raise the thrust lever, and the aircraft naturally will want to drive forward. That's about it. Yeah, if you guys want me to talk about any more of this stuff, just let me know in the comments. Maybe I'll do some more on this eventually. But yeah, we'll go inside now and take a look at the cockpit here. Yeah, it's a Delta model, so you're getting all steam gauges. Looks pretty decent. There's a couple things I feel like the modeling here is a little generic. The switches especially, I mean, they're big, blocky, not very well modeled. They don't really look like this. The engine condition levers right here, the ECLs, don't really look right. They're laid out properly, but they're much longer, not short and stubby like this. And they're also meant to be slowly moved, not, they don't just slap forward and back like this. because this actually controls, in the ground position, controls your start fuel going to your engines, and then you slowly advance them from ground to flight, which is going to bring the engines up from ground idle to flight idle, bring the rotor RPM up to 100%. But more on that later. As you guys can see, visibility is very good in the CH-47. This is accurate. Really helps with sight picture. You sitting up in the cockpit, you have 95-ish feet of helicopter behind you that you can't see. So it's nice to be able to have some decent visibility to the sides and below you. And we rely on our crew members, our flight engineers, and our crew chiefs in the back very, very heavily to help with our scan and situational awareness. So those guys are huge. They're essential for what we do. We wouldn't be able to operate this aircraft without them. You can see here you get a little EFB, little iPad. We use these in the real helicopter for not really so much checklists, but documentation, regulations, doctrinal stuff. And we use some for-flight style products for instrument flying and flight planning. Yeah, I saw some early preview videos here that the doors here, the jettisonable doors, do not open properly. I don't. It looks like they fixed it and they just have them removed completely. That's fine. I don't know how to get the door back, so that's cool. I'll have to mess with that later. Like I said, I'm not much of a flight sim, Microsoft Flight Sim guy here, so gonna be some teething issues. I'll find out a way to get the door back eventually before we crank. The handle in the Fox model is not up here, it's down here halfway through. The door is a clamshell design, so it does completely remove like this. We do not fly with the doors off in the Chinook. That would be a nightmare. Got a Category 2 hurricane worth of downwash coming off of these rotor blades, and I'm not about to fly with the doors off. But it's used in case of emergencies if I need to get out of the cockpit quickly. As you can see, it's a little tight. The companionway here is pretty small, and the seats don't swivel around or anything, so I kind of have to climb out and over. So if I need to get out, I can pop the door here. Handle goes forward. The door collapses in a clamshell inward towards the pilot, so you got to move your head out of the way. It's designed that way. That way, if you're sinking in the water, you're still able to get the door open. All right, we'll talk through some cockpit layout stuff here. I'll take you through important switches, functionalities. I don't know a lot of the shortcuts here, so bear with me as I go to this little screen and talk about things. All right, so we'll go to the overhead panel first. We will start at the bottom. This is kind of the flow. The overhead's laid out in a bit of a weird way on the 47, so it's not going to flow kind of like an airliner would. But we do have a bit of a flow that we stick to. And it starts right here at the electrical panel. So it's laid out the same way in the Fox model. A couple different enunciators on here in the version that I fly, but essentially the same battery switch, typical APU right there. Here's your main generators here, Gen 1 and Gen 2, and the APU generator. APU provides utility hydraulic power to the aircraft. We'll get through a little bit of this other hydraulic related stuff later, but utility hydraulic power to the aircraft and the engine starters, the ramp, the swivel locks, the power steering, brakes, all that kind of stuff can be powered through the utility system. The flight control hydraulic systems are a separate system. It's technically triple redundant. For the flight control hydraulics, we have two independent flight control hydraulic pumps, number 1 and 2. They run off the main transmissions. And then we have these, the power transfer units, which a lot of aircraft have something very similar. The Airbus airliners have them. Switches utility hydraulic power into uses the utility pumps to be able to power the flight controls. Use them in emergencies if we lose both flight hydraulic pumps, or on the ground before the engines or the rotors are spinning, when we do not have any hydraulic power for the flight controls. Moving up here, This is pretty much the same as the Fox model, the troop warning alarm and the jump lights used for airborne operations, paradrops and free fall. And also if I'm about to crash and I have, for some reason, the ability to think about hitting this alarm, I can do that to let you know we're about to crash into the ground, but realistically I'm going to forget all about that and just try not to die. Heater switches and windshield wipers. You start the heater, you put the heater on like this, you start it right there. Heater is located behind the right seat in the heater closet, and it is a jet fuel powered, basically a little jet engine kind of thing. It works really well. We don't have any air conditioning, but the heater works nice. And you can turn the blower on, which just does not dump the fuel in to make the fire, just kind of a big fan coming from the heater. Not going to be functional in this, I don't think. We'll talk more on that later, but there's a lot of functionality that's not in this model. Not that you really need a heater in a flight sim, but it's just one of the things. Wipers, don't use them above 130 knots indicated, or they will kind of fly up here, and you won't be able to park them back in their stowed position. This is a Delta model thing, this compass thing. I would assume it's in relation to, I don't think it's related to the magnetic compass. I think it's probably something with the HSI. There you can, looks like, have it just free spinning or slave to some sort of information and maybe set it with this knob. I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, I don't fly Delta models. And the Fox model, it's all glass except for we still do have the backup magnetic compass right there. Lighting is kind of spread across the overhead panel, so doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but here's one of the lighting panels. This is your searchlight controls here, so this will turn power to the searchlights on. It does not turn the searchlight on, and it does not unstow the searchlight. It just, here's your left seat control, your right seat control. It just allows them to be turned on and unstowed. Well, unstowed specifically, and slewed around. You can turn them on in the off position here, but you cannot move it. So like we talked about earlier, they do not sit fixed forward like they are in this model. They're stowed in the nose. You turn those switches on, you turn, I'll get to it later, but on the thrust you'll turn the searchlight on, and you'll unstow it and slew it around to where you want it. And you can activate the IR or the overt modes on that. We'll keep these on even though it doesn't do anything in this. More lighting stuff here. Formation lights, we don't really use those in the Chinook very often. Position lights will be used if it's degraded visibility or nighttime, really dark. When you have the NVG and normal setting, you will turn on your top and bottom anti-collision lights per both Army regulation and FAA regulation. This is your EAPS panel. EAPS are not installed in this aircraft. It's still, they've included this in their documentation as part of the startup procedure, even though there's no EAPS. It's not realistic, and it still will give you an active caution telling you that they are not in, or telling you that they're not on if you leave those switches off, which is also not accurate. So it makes you turn them on even though there's zero functionality, and they are not even installed on this variant of the aircraft, at least on this one that I have spawned in. I don't know if you can use them or not, but it's one of those things, like I said, that I have some issues with. Here's some more lighting stuff. Stick position indicator. We usually brighten this one up all the way because it is hard to see. These rheostats, these little knobs are awful. I think it's just a Microsoft Flight Sim thing. They turn super slow, but we'll talk more on the stick position indicator in a bit. Here's your fuel panel. Pretty similar to the Fox model. The crossfeed switch is located a little closer to the center. One fuel pump in each auxiliary tank and 2 in each main fuel cell. Refuel station switch just provides power to the external pressure single point refuel station on the number 2 side of the aircraft that our boys use to refuel the aircraft. Here's your engine condition levers. I already talked about these. They do not look like this in the Fox or the Delta model, and they do not function like this. You can move them from stop to ground quickly and get them set for the startup procedure, but moving them from ground to flight is a very slow and deliberate process. It's done with both of them at the same time. Right here, your engines are running, your blades are spinning at ground idle right now. You would make sure indications are where they need to be, and then you would slowly advance ECL 1 and 2 from ground to flight, monitoring for normal indications, pressures, temperatures, rotor speed, and NG. It does not function like this in this version, and the startup sequence in general is not correct at all, but I'll talk more on that later. Well, if it's a 714 alpha engine, it is not correct. It seems like they have the 714 alpha engines on here, but they may have used the startup procedure for the old, very old 712s, which is a little bit different, and yeah, it's just a little weird. Your FADEC panel, very important panel here. This NR switch is always set to 100. It's spring-loaded to center at 100% NR. This is the FADEC full authority digital electronic control or engine control, one of those two. Too many acronyms to remember sometimes. But this is your engine fuel kind of governor system. You have a primary mode and a reversionary mode for both engine 1 and 2. Primary is going to give you the most protections and the most functionality, and reversionary will kick on automatically if you have a failure in primary. And it still works pretty well. It's just not going to be as good at keeping things matched up, keeping your NR at 100%, etc., etc. The backup power switch is going to give power to the maintenance panel in the back, which I'll talk on in a minute if I can find out how to get the camera back there. Like I said, I'm not good at this stuff. And also allows the engine start sequence to be done in primary mode. The shutdown is always done automatically in reversionary mode. Not anything that you do up here, but that's just how the Chinook works. Engine start switch here goes to 1 or 2. We generally start 1 first. Overspeed switch is not going to sit over here. It is spring-loaded to center. And this one just seems like it doesn't work properly. It's a 3-position switch. You got center. Hold it to 1 or hold it to 2. That is not used for anything. Do not use that switch. That's probably not functional in this anyway. It's very basic modeling done on the systems here, so I don't think that would even work. But that's used for maintenance checks. We don't touch that as regular Chinook pilots. Load share switch, once again, probably not modeled, but this will tell the FADEC what it's going to try to match. So in the default setting on torque, it's going to be attempting to match your torque numbers between the 1 and 2 engine while maintaining 100% NR, plus or minus 1. If you switch this to PTIT, it will then instead attempt to match power turbine inlet temperature between the first and second engine, and your torques may not be the same. We generally keep this in torque unless we're having some weird indications, and we can switch it around and see if it fixes it up. Continuing on the overhead panel, more lighting stuff up here. Emergency exits are always armed until we shut down. There's some flood lighting and stuff like that, your dome lights. This is your flood light brightness, I believe. We already talked about the searchlight controls, center instrument and pilot instrument. Lighting rheostats, so obviously the pilots, and then the center here, the left side will be on the left side of the overhead, right up here. Overhead consoles there. Anti-ice, we do not have de-ice in the CH-47. No blade de-ice, and we are restricted from flying in icing conditions if we're IFR or IMC. But we do have some rudimentary anti-ice that we can use, just some windshield heat for the center windscreen and the left and right windscreens, and the pitot heat to keep our make sure our pitot tubes don't freeze over and we lose airspeed indications and stuff. Don't want that to happen. Oops, sorry. Hoist and cargo hook controls here. Pretty important panel here. Hoist stuff we don't do a whole lot. We generally don't control it from the cockpit. They have the what we call the pickle grip in the back. Just a handheld grip that allows them to control the hoist, release sling loads and stuff like that. So, but you can control the hoist from the cockpit if you want. You have your guarded cable cutter switch if you're doing hoist operations, or mostly it'd be used for hoist operations like picking people up in emergency situations, or doing special purpose insertion and and exfil stuff, called spies, kind of carrying people out of bad areas with a hoist, and you ever needed to punch the hoist or cut the cable, you can hit this switch from up here. There's other ways to do it in the helicopter as well. Like I said, the pickle grip can punch the hoist as well, the cable, but squibs are in the cable cutter. You flip that switch, going to pop the squib, little cartridge that will cut the cable. You can reel the hoist in or extend it here with this rheostat, this knob, as long as the hoist master switch, sorry, I hate these switches, it's going to be another thing that I talk about, is in the pilot position. Then you can control the hoist from here. Usually we keep it off. If we're doing any hoist operations, it's generally going to be in the remote position so they can control it from the back. Hoist is located in the number 2 side behind the right seat in that heater closet where the heater is, and you can winch in about 12,000 pounds depending on your pulley configuration. Cargo hooks, very important panel here. You have the master switch here. Off position is where it's generally going to be until you start doing your sling load operations, or when you're testing the hooks on startup, which is probably not going to be functional in this, but it's okay. The arm position is where it will be during hookup and before, when you start flying, before you've reached your best single engine airspeed, which depending on your configuration is generally somewhere between 65 and 75 knots. And then your hook selector here. So it's generally, we test all the positions here to make sure they all work. So forward, mid, aft, tandem, and all. But generally during any sort of sling load operation, it's going to be in the all position. This just, the only difference is basically where this knob is positioned is what hooks will be affected when you press your cargo hook release or when they press it in the back. So there's nothing wrong with having it on all, even if you're doing a single point sling load from the center hook. It will just, I'll kind of get into the weeds on how the hooks work, but the center hook will open and release the load. The forward and aft hook will not open, and the reason why is because the forward and aft hook in the CH-47, individually they can carry a little less than the center hook. The max weight on the center hook is 26,000 pounds. The forward and aft in a tandem configuration is 25,000 pounds. Individually, though, they are, I believe, 17,000 pounds. Something I'm supposed to know off the top of my head, but it's the weekend and I haven't been studying, so I don't really care. But they will not, the forward and aft will not open because they're electrically operated, and they require a minimum weight to be on them before they will actually open. The center hook is hydraulically opened or pneumatically opened, and will open even with 0 weight on it, and then hydraulically closed. So what's happening is if I'm armed and all right here, and I hit this button, the forward and aft hook have a little cam that is going to ratchet if there's no weight on them. That'll let you know that they're operational. They check it from the outside, make sure that that ratchet's moving. You'll also get some cautions, forward hook open, aft hook open, even though they haven't opened. But the mid hook, the center hook, will open when you hit this button. You'll get the caution associated with it as well, mid hook open. And then to reset the hooks, you're going to take the switch to off. You're going to clear the mid hook because it will hydraulically close, and if someone has their hand in that area, I could take their hand off. So clear the mid, bam. In the off position, the mid hook will close, and then the reset position, you hold it. It doesn't just stay there like this. It's spring operated, but you hold it there for a second, bring it back to off, and it will clear your cautions. And now you would be off and all. This is the position you would be at in normal flight. That way you don't accidentally jettison your sling load. It looks like you get some hook loaded indications for the forward and aft hook. That's in relation. This is not on the Fox model, but this is, we get annunciators for that on our MFD. It'll say hook loaded. But this is in regards to the weight, the minimum weight that must be on the forward and aft hooks. If there's nothing on there, these will not come on. As soon as some weight comes on there, Those will illuminate to let you know that they are detecting weight, and if you were to hit this switch, they would indeed open. Emergency release all. This is one way to emergency jettison your sling load. Generally it's going to be done from the back on the pickle grip or with the manual release all lever in the hell hole. That would be if you're running into functionality issues with either your cyclic switch or the switch on the pickle grip. This is an emergency backup, and there's one more emergency backup in the back to release the sling loads. That's it for the hoist and cargo hook stuff. Here's your hydraulic isolation panel and hydraulic controls here. So we've talked about the PTUs a little bit here. These do not function like they're supposed to in this aircraft. I will touch on that later. It's one of several issues I have with this Delta model. Like I said earlier, these are the power transfer units that take utility hydraulic pressure from the APU hydraulic motor pump and provide power to the flight controls for ground checks, and also in the event of an emergency you can get hydraulic flight control power. They are a variable rate of pressure, so you have to be kind of slow. Can't be super quick with the way that you move the flight controls if you're operating only off the PTUs, or you could exceed their flow capability and give yourself some problems. This is a flight control hydraulic pump isolation switch. We only use this on the ground during our flight control travel and hydraulics checks. Once again, not going to be functional in this Delta model. It stays in both. When we do our checks on the ground, we switch it to number 1, which will isolate the number 1 system, turning off the number 2 system. We'll check all the flight controls for smooth motion, cross-coupling, binding, and stuff like that. Complete the checks, neutralize the flight controls, put it back to both. Wait for pressure to be indicated on both systems again, switch it to 2. The other pilot in the left seat will then check on the number 2 system, all the same checks, and then back to both, make sure all the pressure is restored. If you were to lose a flight control hydraulic pump in flight, there are solenoids in the pumps that will automatically switch on, turn off the bad pump and switch to the good pump. And this switch will not allow you to select a bad pump. You just leave it in the both position. Probably turn your PTUs on as a backup in case the other one's about to go. But if you had, let's say, a failure on the number 1 system, and for some reason you tried to manipulate the switch to select the number 1 system and deselect the number 2 system, the aircraft will not allow you to do that. It will still select the good system. Just a nice built-in redundancy, and like I said, this switch does not, even in the event of a failure of one pump, does not get manipulated. It's all automatic. Some isolation switches here. So the utility system has 9 components, 9 subsystems to it. I'm not going to talk through them all, but this is the way that you can isolate some of those in the event of a leak. The ramp can be controlled from the cockpit. We generally let them do it in the back, but you take this ramp power switch to emergency, and then you can manipulate the ramp up or down right here with that guarded switch. Generally this switch is going to be in the on position, which allows them to manipulate it from the back. If you need to isolate the system due to a leak somewhere in the ramp utility hydraulic lines, you can take this switch off, and you will also lose power to a couple other subsystems as well that are attached to that same switch. This is the power steering isolation switch. It's the same as this. It's used for isolating leaks in the power steering system, which is going to include the brakes, the swivel locks, and the power steering. You would flip that switch right there to disable hydraulic power to all those components and hopefully stop your leak. That's it for the overhead panel. These guys are actually flashlights. They are able to be pulled off from their little mounts and used in the cockpit, or you can take them off completely if you have to escape the aircraft and you have a little flashlight, emergency flashlight. I have never once turned these things on in my entire life. The dome lights are up here. I don't know why they didn't model them. Fancy little mirror. That mirror belongs to the pilot in command, at least when I'm in the aircraft. Do not touch my mirror. Allows me to look back into the cabin area without swinging my head around. Alright, we'll go down to the center console here. Let me get a better camera angle. Okay. Alright. We'll just talk. They're pretty similar left and right. Not much point in going over there. We'll just talk the center first, and we'll move to the outboard on the right seat side. Then we'll move down to the cannon console, center console, and to the flight controls. And then I'll try to get us into the back of the aircraft somehow and talk through some features of the back. Alright, so starting off in the center console, or center instrument panel here. This is your fire suppression system here, a little different in the Fox model. So in the Delta model here, you got your fire pull handles, which will shut fuel off to either the number 1 or number 2 engine. And if the fire does not go out when you pull these, then you have your fire suppressant system here. There's 2 fire bottles in the back of the fuselage area. You have bottle 1, bring the switch up, bottle 2, bring the switch down. And that will discharge a fire suppressant agent into the engine compartment. You get 2 shots and that's it, so if the fire doesn't go out after the second bottle is popped, then you have probably less than 3 minutes to get on the ground and get out of the aircraft before the entire aircraft is a smoldering pile of rubble. Transmissions are made out of magnesium, and magnesium ignites very quickly and very hot and will burn the whole aircraft down. This is your APR-39 RWR radar warning receiver screen. Don't think it's going to be modeled in any way in Microsoft Flight Sim, but in DCS I'm sure there would be some functionality there, but the Fox model does not use this anymore, so we'll probably get some different functionality in DCS when the Fox model releases. This panel is an op. A little bit of just kind of some indicator lights for the status of crypto, your IFF, and some GPS related things. And you would flip that guarded switch to zeroize your GPS keys, crypto related stuff that I can't talk about. Alright, so now we got some engine and transmission indication and gauges here along with fuel. So let's go through these. Number 1 and number 2 engine indications here. Number 1 is your left side, number 2 is your right side. Starting with N1 or NG, they're the same thing. It's your gas generator section of the engine. Basically in intervals of 10%, so going up to your limit, which is 111. Ground idle is 50%. You're on your startup with these 714 alphas. I think you're looking for 10% to release the start switch, and the Fox model you're looking for 12%, and the 712s the startup procedure is completely different, and I believe that you keep the start switch held until you've reached 50% ground idle, and then you just slap the engine condition lever to flight, which is really weird and not how we do things anymore. General normal operational area, depending on conditions, is going to be probably around 95%, 90 to 95%. PTIT, power turbine inlet temperature, indicated here for engines 1 and 2, Celsius, degrees Celsius here. Limitations are annotated by your tick marks here, and also the outside of the gauge in the yellow areas where your limitations start. Your 30-minute limit starts at 816 degrees. It just goes up from there. A little bit different limitations, more than likely, for the Delta model here. I haven't looked through their technical manual, but I would assume they're pretty close. The upper end 12-second transient is 943 degrees. At least in the Fox model. It's probably the same in the Delta. You're not going to have any issues with that in this model. It's not modeled with enough depth to simulate any sort of engine temperature issues or hot starts or anything like that, I can assure you. very simply modeled, which is kind of unfortunate, but hopefully Fox model and DCS will remedy some of these issues I have. Engine oil, temperature here. Engine oil pressure here. Keep it in the green. Startup, you're looking for it to be greater than 5 psi at ground idle. And your transmission stuff. So you got transmission oil pressure and temperature for all 5 transmissions. You select which transmission is going to be displayed here with this little rocker switch. Obviously this is all on an MFD on the ICAST page in the Fox model, but we do not have MFDs in the Delta model. So you would look through your transmissions here, and it will give you your pressure indications. So you got your forward transmission, your aft transmission. This is your combining transmission, your left engine transmission, and your right engine transmission. It looks like there's a test function as well to make sure the gauge is operational, which seems to be at least somewhat simulated in this, even though I do not have battery power or anything on. It still seems to be working. These are your longitudinal cyclic trim position gauges. Unfortunately, they're not modeled in this, which is very disappointing because that is a huge part of what makes the Chinook fly how it does. So basically, they have 3 positions. Retract, which will stay in that position up until 60 knots. The ground position, which is going to be when you're on the ground. And then they will slowly extend from retract based on your airspeed. Both the forward and the aft LCTs will extend slowly based on your airspeed until they are fully extended at 150 knots. And what that does is, in most helicopters, as you increase your speed, you're going to be increasing your nose low attitude of the helicopter. It's just how helicopters work. In order to go faster, we need forward cyclic. It's not just power like in an airplane. So to go forward cyclic means nose down, and that's just how you're going to be flying around at higher speeds, and you're kind of just looking down at the ground at whatever 10 degrees nose low, whatever it may be, depending on the helicopter and the speed. The Chinook cruises with a extremely nose level attitude, basically at all speeds, unless you're intentionally trying to speed up or slow down because of these LCTs. So let's say you add forward cyclic to speed up, and that's another issue. These flight controls should not move right now. I have no hydraulic power going to them. They're completely seized in their position in real life until you get power to the flight controls hydraulics, but whatever. As you nose over, the aircraft will establish a nose low attitude just like any other helicopter would. As your speed increases, the LCTs will extend in unison in the automatic mode, which is right here. And the aircraft will begin to, you'll just speed up forever if you keep the nose down. So you level the nose with the horizon, and the aircraft will maintain whatever speed you tried to get it to. So very nice. You can manually actuate them. We'll talk about that in a bit, but they are a huge Chinook thing, and it's very sad that they're not modeled in this Miltech CH-47D. Moving on, this is your fuel flow, rate of fuel burn for engine 1 and 2. You can see the little tick or the little numbers on the needles here. They're both together right now, but I think this is another thing that's not properly modeled. But generally in forward flight on a slick aircraft with no load or anything at about 120 knots in cruise, you'll see about 2,000 pounds per hour total. So whatever that is, 1,000, 1,200 pounds per each engine. Total fuel, right now we're not full on gas, but you do your little fuel selector here. Total fuel capacity in the Chinook is 6,800 pounds if you do what we call over the wing refueling, which is just dumping gas into the fuel pods via these points right here. We don't generally do that. We will use the single point pressure refuel panel right here under this panel. Allows us to refuel while the engines are still turning. It's usually a little quicker. And this fills all the tanks pretty quickly. And if you use this, which you're going to most of the time, the most fuel that you'll generally get into the tanks is going to be about 6,200 pounds. Alright. Yeah, right here, caution panel, or your caution advisory panel here. Amber color for engine, or sorry, warnings and cautions. And you'll get a green color for advisories, like your APU on, external power, park and brake, and your hook advisories. This is just brightness control and a test switch to test to make sure everything lights up like it should. I can promise you this isn't functional, but this is just changing the VHF antenna to either the top antenna or the bottom antenna. Just depending on where you are, it might be easier to talk to someone if you're far away from them on the top antenna, or if you're, if you need to try something else, you can switch to the bottom antenna. Up over here, cruise guide indicator, CGI, big Chinook thing as well. This measures strain on the rotor system. There's a system that is measuring the strain on the forward rotor system and the aft rotor system, blending them together and giving you the the highest value of the two. Keep it in the green. It should not, well, you have to avoid excursions into the yellow or the red for greater than 45 seconds, because that's indicating that something is seriously wrong. You're either in severe or extreme turbulence, you're way too heavy, way too high, and your rotor system is potentially going to come off the aircraft. You don't want that, so keep it in the green. It's not simulated properly at all in this Miltech model. This is just your test switch. Forward, test the forward, it goes into the white band. Test the aft, it goes into the white band. The switch, once again, I can check it, but probably not functional just due to the not really any good modeling on the CGI anyway. Radio call, that tail number I talked about, 167, 08167 should be in the radio call placard here. It's not, so it's incorrect. I think this is a master caution light. It's kind of where it is in the Fox model, similar. Airspeed indicator, above 40 knots in the CH-47, you're going to have something called turn coordination. It's going to keep the aircraft in trim, which we'll talk about later. This aircraft does not stay in trim like it should. Like I said, you shouldn't need to touch the pedals in the 47, especially above 40 knots. You might have to a little bit before 40 knots, depending on winds and stuff, but above 40 knots, you'll stay in trim pretty well. VNE is 170 knots in the Chinook. I'm sure in the sim you can go that fast without any issues, but in a real one, anything above like 150, 155 kind of starts to feel like you're on the Space Shuttle Columbia, and it's not very fun. So we don't generally go that fast. 120, 130, 140, 145, all that stuff is perfectly doable. And also your VNE is going to depend on environmental conditions, the weight of the aircraft, and all that kind of stuff too. So you may not get 170 out of your VNE. It might be closer to a 150. Regular attitude indicator here. Pretty standard stuff. Altimeter. Once again, pretty standard. Radar altimeter brightness adjustment here. Radar altimeter is right there. Very handy in a helicopter. Shows you your height above ground level versus mean sea level. Very useful for what we do. VSI, pretty standard. HSI, looks like you get DME course, and you get VOR, TACAN. You can fly some NDB stuff via the ADF. Looks like these marker beacon controls here, probably for volume, are not functional. Chronometer looks exactly like this in the Fox model. Very useful. It's just located over here. We use this for timing engine starts and whatnot. You get your rotor NR gauge here, rotor speed. inner dial is anything below 60% and then 60% and up. FADEC in the primary mode and in the reversionary mode will attempt to maintain 100% NR plus or minus 1. It does a really good job of that. Your normal operating range is 97 to 103. And it's got your transients and limitations indicated by the tick marks here for auto rotations and stuff like that. 111.5 being the top end transient, and then 92% being the low end. Torque indications here. This does not function at all like it should. Something I've noticed in my past couple times flying this thing, it just doesn't give you accurate torque indications at all. But maybe it's a bug and they'll fix it. But 100% is your dual engine torque limit. 123 is your single engine torque limit. It's based on power turbine inlet temperature limitations, and your torque available depending on conditions, depending on what you're doing and the aircraft loadout, might be quite a bit lower than 100 dual engine. You might only have 90% to play with that day, for example. The airport we're at right now is up at about 4,000 feet above sea level. I can tell you with a slick aircraft and the Fox model, picking up to a hover dual engine, you're going to be right around 50% in ground effect and about 56 to 58% out of ground effect. And I will show you in a little bit that is not going to be the case on this one. Moving the cyclic out of the way here, which I shouldn't be able to do. Like I said earlier, it's just your trim ball. Theoretically, this should always be in trim. We've already kind of talked about it, but it doesn't work in this version. Pretty disappointing. Pull for cockpit air, but they decided to make it a switch. That is not what it is in the real aircraft. It's just a pull knob, pulls in and out. Instead, they made it this big, giant, ugly switch that doesn't look like any switch I've ever seen in a Chinook. Obviously not functional in this. Park and brake lever is located down here, not up here. It's on the kind of the upper end of this air control and cabin air levers here. Hold the brakes in, pull the lever up, and the brakes will be set. That way you don't have to keep pressure on the toe brakes here. Talk about the cyclic while we're here. AFCS mode beep trim switch, just like a trim in an airplane. Really nice. This is your external load cargo hook release switch. Like I said, there's multiple ways to do it. Generally, we only touch this when we're testing the hooks on the startup. And the guys will release the sling loads in the back. Is your push to talk. First detent is going to be ICS, or the intercom communication systems inside the aircraft, and whatever radio you have selected will be activated by squeezing to the second detent. Force trim release doesn't function in Microsoft Flight Sim, I don't think, but you would hold this down, move the flight controls, the cyclic, and the pedals to a position where the aircraft is flying how you want it to fly in trim. And then you would release them and they would stay there. Obviously it doesn't function, and that is a shame, because it just like trimming a fixed wing aircraft takes a lot of the forces out of the yoke that you have to fight against. The force trim release does the same for a helicopter. I do not know what the switch in the bottom does, to be honest, and I don't know how to get the camera in front of the cyclic to read their label on it. But it's probably not that important and or not functional, because there's a lot of things that don't work in this. Pedals are standard. They're not called rudder pedals. It's a helicopter, and they're also not called anti-torque pedals because there's no anti-torque necessary in the Chinook. Just call them the pedals. Left is going to bring the nose to the left and the tail to the right around the center of the aircraft. Right will do the same to the right. The Chinook is unique in the fact that if I were to apply cyclic and pedal in the same direction, obviously you got to modulate it and make sure it's not quite as simple as I'm describing it, but it will rotate around the ramp of the aircraft, keeping the ramp kind of centered over a target. And if I do opposite, cyclic and pedal, I will rotate around the nose of the aircraft, keeping a target right in front of the nose and swinging the aircraft around it. So that's pretty cool. Thrust lever. It's not called a collective in the Chinook because forward and aft cyclic in a tandem rotor helicopter also collectively increases or decreases the pitch in the rotor blades. It's called differential collective pitch. So forward is going to increase pitch collectively in the aft rotor system and decrease it in the forward, tilting the aircraft forward and causing it to move forward, and vice versa for aft cyclic. Therefore, we do not call the thrust lever the collective. It's also called thrust because it sounds cool, and we like things that sound cool in Chinook land. So the Fox Model 1, obviously all the flight controls in the Fox model look much different than this. We have a lot more going on the cyclic. It's a different design, as well as the thrust lever. A lot more going on our thrust lever, and it's a different design as well, but pretty similar. Thrust mag brake trigger is underneath where your index finger goes. There's a mag brake that keeps the thrust held in place wherever you set it. You must squeeze the trigger to move it up or down. There are ways to slip the thrust without squeezing the trigger in the event of a failure, but not going to be modeled in here, and doesn't matter anyway because you're just going to move your whatever flight control HOTAS thing you have, and it's going to move regardless of the trigger being squeezed. So this is your FADEC engine 1, engine 2. We call them the Inker-Dinker switches in the Fox model. They're not located on the thrust, and we don't use them in primary mode at all. But if you're in a reversionary mode to where the system is not as fast to keep up with matching your NG, your torque, etc., you may have to manually match the engines together with these switches up or down. Once again, probably not modeled. This is your searchlight China hat slew control. Goes extend, retract, and then obviously you can move it further out or bring it further in and move it left to right, whatever direction you want. This is how you turn your searchlight on. It's not simulated in this version, it just comes on by itself somehow. This is how you brighten it and dim it. That's it for the thrust lever. Let's move on to the canted console here. VOR controls, IFF controls, your squawk codes and all that would go in there. Some radio controls here, probably selects what radio you're maybe volume control or something. We don't have this in the Fox model, but it looks like ICS radio volume control, and then which radio you're actively listening to. AFCS panel, pretty similar to the Fox model. The Fox model has some more stuff on it. It's located in the middle. Some rudimentary autopilot stuff here. I don't think any of it works. The rat out hold switch engages, but the other ones don't, so maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. This is your longitudinal cyclic trim control here, which I talked about earlier. Doesn't work in this. You'd leave it in the auto position. They would automatically extend based on your airspeed or retract based on your airspeed. Manual, you can manually extend or retract them. And once again, these are 3 position switches that are sprung to the center position. Then you would hold them forward to extend, hold them back to retract. Switch this back to auto, it'll manually put them back to where they need to be. AFCS system select switch, the automated flight control system, not modeled in this at all. Leave it in both, you'll test it. There's no reason to try to fly AFCS off in a simulated version of the Chinook because it's impossible. I doubt that anyone's going to simulate that anyway because, once again, it's pretty much impossible to fly AFCS off in a simulation of a Chinook because it is entirely a seat-of-your-pants feeling. The Chinook has 0 aerodynamic properties at all whatsoever. So with the automated flight control system inactive, it is probably... I feel like I can pretty confidently say it's probably one of the hardest helicopters in the world to fly. Without the tail boom and horizontal vertical stabilizers of a normal helicopter with a tail rotor, you have no, like I said, no aerodynamic properties at all. It's just a giant flying school bus. So Very challenging to fly AFCS off. We train for it very, very regularly in the real world. Something we do day and NVG in all sorts of conditions and environments. But we go to the simulator and we do not fly AFCS off in the simulator because it is without the ability to feel the aircraft and what it's trying to do. It is just not possible. The aircraft will get, you will get very, very behind the aircraft very quickly, and it can get, you could crash and die. Not functional. Air just kind of directs the flow of air throughout the cabin. This is ADF stuff for doing NDB-based navigation. I've never, I think maybe once in my life, have I used any sort of ADF equipment. It's not really a thing on the Fox model anymore, and they're getting rid of a lot of NDBs, at least in the US. This is your longitudinal stick position indicator. This is an extremely important thing for the Chinook. Unfortunately, not modeled very well at all in this Delta model. There's quite a bit, I don't want to say sensitivity, but realistically 2 inches aft on the cyclic, which is what it's showing here. So I'm at the neutral position. 2 inches aft is much more cyclic input than what I've done here. And you're not going to get, it's just the rate is not really properly indicated on the linear variable differential transducer right here, which is called, it's the technical term for what this is, but it's the longitudinal stick position indicator. So during your flight control travel and hydraulics checks, you're looking to make sure that you have at least 7 inches of forward travel. That is usually about all you're going to get. So this one gets way more than that. And about 4-ish inches of aft travel. That's about all you're going to get. But this one, once again, has much more than that. But the cyclic itself is just not moving enough to, like, realistically, this full aft position on the cyclic would probably just be about 4.5 to 5 inches on this. So that's unfortunate. We use this in a tandem rotor helicopter. Like I've said a couple times here, we don't touch the flight controls on the ground. When the flight controls are in their neutral position and the thrust is at the ground detent, you have very, very limited flight control movement that you are allowed to do because of something called droop stop pounding. Basically, if you move the flight controls too much on the ground, the aircraft can tear itself apart. The aft rotor system will collide with the fuselage of the aircraft, and everything blows up and everyone dies. So it is very important for us to have a neutral flight control position on the ground. This is what allows us to determine that the cyclic is in the neutral position on the ground. And we use certain stick positions, like 2 inches aft. Is very important for certain maneuvering. You'll see the two-wheel taxi that Chinooks do, where they kind of pick the nose up in the air, but they're driving around and the aft gear is still on the ground. That is done usually with a 2 to 2.5 inch aft stick position. Plants the aft gear on the ground, and when you pull power in and keep your cyclic in that position, it will pick the nose up, but not the entire helicopter. We don't generally use much of a forward stick position for any maneuvers, but the aft stick position is very important for both that two-wheel taxi, roll-on landings that we do in the event of an engine failure, or the pinnacle landings that we do on mountaintops and ridge lines and things like that look really cool. All done with a stick position, an aft stick position of generally about 2 inches to 2.5 inches. Unfortunately, I can tell you that all the cool two-wheel maneuvers and stuff like that, there's not, and this may change with the new tandem rotor stuff that's coming out in the next update, I guess, for Microsoft Flight Sim, but as of right now, tandem rotor aerodynamics are not properly modeled, so holding 2 inches aft, or even 4 inches aft, because it's not really accurate on this, and pulling in power will pick the nose up, but you'll just scream backwards at a very high rate of speed, and there's no way to recover it and get the aircraft to drive forward while keeping the nose off the ground, at least not that I've figured out yet. So that's a shame, but it's not the end of the world. That's about it for this stuff. All this stuff down here is just radio controls. You got some countermeasures, aviation survivability equipment stuff here that's probably not going to be modeled. Right here is the high freak radio. That's the antenna that I was talking about on the number 1 side that's not modeled. This is the radio head for that. Probably doesn't work in this. High freak is a pretty niche type of radio used mostly by the Air Force nowadays, but another radio type thing here. UHF radio here. Should be no lights on. There's no electrical power in the aircraft, so I'm not sure why it's showing me that I'm up 22500. This is your communications kind of control panel for the right seat. There's one for the left seat, and there's one back here for what would be the jump seat or troop commander seat that sits across the companionway here. This controls kind of what radio you are listening to and which radio you are pushing out on. So right here is ICS. I squeeze the trigger, it's just going to talk to my buddies in the aircraft. Select one of them, and if I squeeze to the second D10 on the trigger, it's going to talk on whatever the first radio is, which is probably COM 1 right here, probably a FM radio or something. Yeah, and you select all the radios, you'll probably have 5 or 6 different radios available to you. Once again, not sure how many of them are going to be modeled in this. There's a Fox mic, FM, and a VHF radio. Some sort of crypto cipher. Yeah, it's all crypto stuff. It's not going to be modeled. And the cap, like I said, for the jump seater. This is your power steering control. So the Chinook has power steering located. It's a power steering pump located in the aft right landing gear. And that's how we taxi on the ground. We do not touch the pedals on the ground. We do not steer with the pedals on the ground. The pedals stay exactly where they are. You have the toe brakes up here that you can use to stop, but you do not steer or actuate the pedals on the ground. You steer with this knob right here, which actuates the power steering in the rear of the aircraft. So your swivel switch here, it's once again one of these big dumb switches that they decided to model. Does not look like this. Has 3 positions. It's got the locked position, which is where it is under normal operation. It's got the unlock position, don't really use that a lot, and the steer position. This is how we activate the power steering, and we steer with this knob left or right to drive around on the ground. That is not modeled in this sim. I think it's a limitation of Microsoft Flight Sim, I'm not sure, but it requires you to use the pedals. Just keep in mind that is not realistic. Yep, so put that back in the locked position, which is where it will stay in flight, and most of the time unless you're intentionally driving around. I don't know if I talked about this radio, but it's a VHF radio as well. That's about it for the cockpit. Let me see here. Go back to our, oh boy, I don't know how any of this works here. Alright, go back. Yeah, I mean, sight picture is pretty realistic. So discussing a couple of the issues that I've mentioned right now, like I said earlier, I do not have any hydraulic system powering the flight controls. These flight controls are seized in position in real life. I would not be able to move them. And just the amount of movement that I'm seeing and kind of how fast it's moving on these blades here is just not realistic at all. And also this is not the movement that it would be making. So forward and aft cyclic, like I said earlier, is doing something called differential collective pitch, which is collectively changing the pitch of all the blades in the forward rotor system. So forward cyclic is going to be collectively decreasing pitch on the forward rotor blade. So all it's doing is just moving the blades down. It's not changing the angle of attack on these blades. So these blades, for example, would be rotating in their direction of travel, which is to the left. They would be rotating kind of downward here, decreasing the angle of attack on the forward blades, decreasing the pitch angle, not just flopping up and down like this. And then lateral cyclic, I mean, that's kind of, I mean, they just move way too much. There's not this much movement on the blades. It's really weird to look at. I'm curious to see on the outside. Yeah, it's just not what it's just not what they do. So you can see here, it's I guess maybe trying to attempt to simulate differential collective pitch here by just tilting the entire head forward. That's not what it does. Like I said, forward cyclic is going to collectively decrease. So you'll see this movement right here. This is me pulling thrust. So right now, all the thrust is out, and these blades are kind of what we call flat pitch. So this movement that you're seeing here is collective increase in angle of attack among all the rotor blades. And this movement you're seeing here is a collective decrease among all the rotor blades. And that is what you would see using fore and aft cyclic in the Chinook. This thing that's going on with these is just not realistic. And then the left movement here, or yeah, moving to the left, moving to the right. I mean, it's just way too much movement. It's not. And now I'm cyclically changing pitch, not just moving the head as a whole like this. Let's see what pedal input does here. Yeah, I mean that's kind of. I mean, it doesn't look realistic at all, but that the motions are what they would be doing. So I'm putting in right pedal right now. It's gonna put the forward and aft rotor system opposite each other, left and right, and left pedal to the opposite of that. So yeah, it's, you know, it might just be a limitation of the sim. I'm not sure, but it's just not right at all. And you know, like I said, these controls would not move until I was on the APU getting hydraulic power, and I had my power transfer units on, or the main rotors were at 100%, the engines were on, and my transmission mounted flight control hydraulic pumps were then powering the flight controls, in which case I would no longer need these power transfer units or the APU. So you know, it is what it is. Might just, like I said, be a limitation of the sim. So that's about it for walkthrough. I'm going to take a pause, try to get this door fixed, and we'll come back. We'll get this thing fired up. We'll talk through the run-up, the startup of the helicopter, which, like I said, I have some issues with. It's not really simulated properly. And then we'll go out and take it for a flight and see how it feels. I'm not going to go super in-depth on the flight. I don't think... You know, maybe I'll do a sling load or something. I don't know, but... yeah, I'm not much of a simulator helicopter pilot. Like I said, I might do a little bit in DCS here and there on the Huey or the MI-8 or something, or the Apache, but mostly if I'm playing flight sims, I'm flying fixed wing stuff. Flying helicopters is a very visceral, seat of your pants experience, and without that feeling, I tend to suck at it. So, but that's fine. We'll give it a shot. Just don't expect it to be super pretty. Yeah, I'll be right back. All right, guys, we're back from quick little pause here. Got my door fixed. Basically, just had to reload the respawn. Guy on Steam messaging me as a Chinook flight engineer on the Fox model, buddy of mine. He might be around to help with some content soon. I got another couple buddies, Chinook pilots, that are going to be helping with some content for the Fox model when it comes to DCS. So that'll be exciting. I'm going to open up the hell hole. I'll get the ramp tongue brought in. And let's top her off on fuel. Like I said, about 6,200 pounds, 6,800 over the wing is the max capacity of fuel. We use jet fuel for our turboshaft engines. Yeah, so 6,900 pounds, not something you're gonna see in the Chinook, but that's fine. Looking back, you can now see the hellhole is open. That's how it basically always, well, it's not going to be open like this, but the rescue door on the bottom and the center hook is going to be unstowed in normal operation. Let me, I'll just comment on how she looks here. I don't know how to get the camera to go to the back, but the 3-man seats look pretty well modeled. We got room for 33. And we've got a single seat here and a single seat here behind the cockpit area. Yeah, I mean it looks okay. So talking about a little bit of stuff back here, this right here on the side of the companionway here is called the flight control closet. I kind of wish that we could take this soundproofing off and I could show you what it looks like, but this is where all the wizardry happens with the flight controls. Basically, the flight controls are mechanically linked. They run under the floor here to the first stage mixing unit at the bottom, and then they are routed vertically up through the flight control closet through a series of hydraulic mechanisms called the integrated lower control arm, integrated lower control actuators, or ILCAs. The ILCAs are very, very useful. I'm not gonna, there's a lot of complex things going on in there. We also have the differential airspeed hold actuator in there, which is what kind of keeps the aircraft flying a certain speed without having to maintain a bunch of forward cyclic along with the LCTs. But then those controls, as I said, they're routed up vertically to the second stage mixing unit, and then they are split fore and aft to the forward head and the aft head. It's a bunch of craziness, a very complex system, but that's pretty cool. It lies right in here. Behind this seat and in the same area as the flight control closet is the avionics closet, where a bunch of avionics equipment is. And then back behind my seat, the right seat here, is the heater closet, and that's also where the winch is stored in the floor of the heater closet. Like I said, about 12,000 pounds of pull, depending on your pulley configuration, and can be operated from the back of the aircraft as well as the front. Alright, so let's go through a startup procedure here now. The way that Miltech Simulations wants you to start the aircraft and the way that the aircraft is actually started are two different things. I will show you how you would actually start the aircraft. Unfortunately, it will not work properly in this and will give me all sorts of weird indications. I'll see if I can fix them to get it running properly, but that's a bit of a downside. And like I said, that could be the case that they're modeling the startup procedure for the 712 engines, which I am not familiar with. I'd have to look at the old training manual, or technical manual for the Delta model with the 712s to see if that startup procedure matches the one that Miltech Simulations has published. Alright, so what we're going to do first is get the battery on. And apologies here, I'm using Track IR. Like I said, I'm not a Microsoft Flight Sim enthusiast much of the time, so I'm going to reset some of my switches here that are not in the correct positions, but because I had to reload the aircraft. So yeah, just bear with me as I go through the overhead panel again real quick. Alright, so yeah, battery switch, battery's on. You get some things starting to come to life now. Some of these things were already on that shouldn't have been. I now have basic DC electrical power that powers a couple subsystems. And it's a 24-volt system as well. And now we're going to test the troop warn alarm and jump lights. So alarm, we got 2 bells, and that's going to be the call out from the guys in the back. We've got our bell and lights right there. You can see it in the aft ramp area, and then there's another one behind the left seat in the forward part of the fuselage that rings those bells. And then you're going to test, you got 2 reds, which is going to be indicated on those lighting, those bell areas again, and here, and then I really hate these switches. And then 2 greens, once again, on the bell things. That's their call out from the back, and you'll have your little indicator light right there. Right, now we're going to start the APU. So the APU, you're going to bring it to run for 5 seconds and start for 2. So APU clear to start. They're going to make sure it's clear in the back, and they're going to get out and monitor the APU fuel cutoff. Get ready to flip it in the event of a fire. So going to run, the left main fuel boost pump is going to kick on to provide start fuel to the APU. You'll hear it in the real aircraft, you don't hear it here. And then run for 2 seconds. I think it just stays there automatically. The startup sounds for the APU is spot on. You're going to hear just a second. That sound right there is the sound of the APU motor pump switching over from a motor to a pump, and we now have utility hydraulic power at 3000 psi. Yeah, I mean, spot on the sounds for the APU, so that's good on them. And now we'll kick the APU generator on. That's going to fire up our avionics, what little we have in the aircraft, and give us AC electrical power. Turn our PTUs on. It's kind of a shame they didn't put the sound in here of the PTUs turning on. If you've ever heard a PTU when it kicks on, it's a very distinct sound. Kind of sounds similar to the Airbus kind of barking sound you'll hear on an Airbus startup. That is their PTUs kicking on, and it's very similar. But PTUs 1 or 2 are on. You should get some hydraulic flight control cautions that will extinguish within 30 seconds on your caution advisory panel. And now we would be able to move the flight controls, unlike before. So yeah, we could do our flight control, travel, and hydraulics check if we wanted to. Isolate number 1 up on 1 down on 2. And they verify the pressures in the back on the maintenance panel. You do your minimum 7 inches forward, 4 inches aft, and neutral smooth operation, all 4 quadrants, no cross coupling or binding. Cross coupling is indicated by for example, the pedals. If I bring in left cyclic and my pedals decide to start moving in some weird way when I'm not touching them, that would be cross coupling. And then you would do your thrust, full up, mag brake is operational, you just make sure it works, full down, positive ground detent, check your pedals, full left and full right, and the flight engineer or crew chief would be monitoring the heads outside the aircraft to look for corresponding movement. And then you go back to both, you transfer the flight controls to your left seater, he would test them up on 2 down 1. And I'm kind of skipping through some things here. The startup for the Fox model is much more in-depth. Obviously, we have a ton more to work with in terms of avionics. So keep that in mind. So we got the battery on, we got the APU on, jam switches on, PTUs are on. And that, I mean, honestly, she's pretty much ready to start right now. So what we're going to do here is we're going to get the left main fuel pumps on. We generally start off the left mains. You can start off the right mains. But generally, going to go off the left. Cross feed switch is open. You're going to put your number 1 ECL in the ground position. You're going to verify that you're 100% on your NR, and both of your FADEC primary reversionary switches are in the primary position. Also, you're going to have your backup power on. You would have done that before you manipulated the ECLs, but it's not going to be simulated in here. Because it's simulating that we have EEPs, even though we don't, we will turn our EEPs fan switches on, keeping the doors closed for now. And that's about it. So I can go on my chronometer here. It functions like the real one, except for the reset function. Doesn't seem to work, but get my timer ready. So this is the startup procedure that you would use on a Delta model with the 714 Alpha engines or a Fox model. It is not going to work properly, and I will talk about that in a second. So I'm going to record this this startup procedure that is just going to totally not work properly. I'll talk about my issues with it, and then we will do the, I'll kind of pause it, come back, and do the startup procedure how they want me to do it, how Miltech does. So 1 ACL is in ground, left main's on, cross feed's open, primary 100%, and we would verify that the key, which they did not model for some reason, is in and on, that it gives power to the engine exciters, which give you your spark. The ECL, being in the ground position, is going to give you your start fuel. The engine will not start with the ECL and stop, but in this simulation it somehow still does. So, alright, and now we're ready to start one, so one clear to start. Make sure it's good on the outside. Start time. Start one. Start switch goes to number 1 position. We're looking for NG on the Delta model to reach 10%. Looking for a positive rise in PTIT and oil pressure to be greater than 5, which it now is. Torque will come up a little bit. It's not simulated properly in this. It's about to go to 100%, which is not realistic. And your NR will slowly start to increase. Looks like our NG is above 10. That's a good light off. Take the start switch back to the center position. There's our engine torque showing 100% single engine, which is totally inaccurate. Looking for the NG or N1, same information, to come up above 50%. Oil pressure is greater than 5. Temperature looks good. PTIT is not rising too rapidly. There we go. N1 stable above 50. Oil pressure above 5. All within about 45 seconds. A little slow on the start there. And clicking that button should reset my clock to 0, so I don't know why it doesn't. So you'll see my NR starting to climb. It should stabilize at about 40%. You're going to notice that it's just about to come all the way up to 100% NR, which is not possible with the ECL in ground. I have to advance this slowly to flight, which will bring the NR up. It'll bring the NG up. See, the NG is already at 100%. It should be at about 50. The torque would be negligible, maybe 1 or 2%. The pressure would probably be close. Maybe it would be high if it's cold start. And I'm already, if you notice here, I've exceeded all of my power turbine and inlet temperature indications or limits, which would not be the case either. So the startup sequence is bugged, and you're going to see here in a minute the number 1 engine is going to roll back. You're going to see my NR is climbing up on its own to 100%. It's at 80 now. Like I said, it would be at 40 still. We're at ground idle right now and not at flight idle. There's no reason for this NR to be advancing like it is. I'm not quite sure why they modeled it this way. So startup sequence is broken. Yeah, so it's already up at 100% now. The torque value just jumped around. Fuel flow is at 2,000 pounds per hour now. And there it's rolling back, like I said. So now I got 0% torque. NG will stabilize again at ground idle. My PTIT is well outside of limits. Oil pressure is a little high. Fuel flow is probably where it should be right now. But man, all this stuff, it's just not where it should be. We'll try to start the number 2 engine. I'll tell you right now, it's not going to work, but it's fine. So number 2's in ground. Start time. 2 clear start. Start at 2. Holding the switch to the number 2 position until NG or N1 reaches 10% in this Delta model. You'll see the audio, it kind of sounds like it's stuck in a weird loop. I'm not sure what it's doing, but it basically it won't start if you try to start them this way. So there's 10%. It's going to hang, and it's just not gonna start properly. So 10%. Oil pressure is greater than 5. PTIT is stuck at 0. No increase in torque. No increase in fuel flow. So it's up at about 17% right now. That's indicative of a hung start, sitting at 17%. So I'm gonna release. Oops, I don't like these switches. I'm gonna release the start switch, and then the engine is going to fail. And now number 2 is rolling back to 0. So failure to start on number 2. Yeah, so the startup sequence is just not flushed out. So now I'm at ground idle on my ECLs here. Like I said, NR would not be at 100%. I would slowly advance ECL 1 or 2 to the flight position after confirming a good start on 1 and 2 on the inside and the outside of the aircraft. And as I slowly advance these ECLs to flight, I would be monitoring my NG or NR, or sorry, NG or N1, same information. My PTIT on both engines to make sure I'm not exceeding any limits, and my oil pressure to make sure I'm not exceeding any limits. I would slowly advance them. The NR rotor speed would come up slowly until FADEC took over at about 97%. And then I could continue advancing them to flight, which would bring the NR up to 100% plus or minus 1. So yeah, I've got some issues with the startup sequence. It's not properly modeled. Sounds are okay. The rotor disc, the tip path plane is not really correct, but it just doesn't. The rotors don't hang down this far, and also this it could just be a monitor thing for me, or maybe a Microsoft Flight Sim thing. But it's much more level with the horizon. You got this big dip here. Kind of looks like the focal point of the center of the blades is out here, when in fact it's over here. But yeah, so that's my issues with the startup. I'm gonna take a pause. I'll come back. I'll get this thing fired up the way that Miltech tells me to. That way we at least get a little bit of indications for our number 2 engine. Yeah, so according to the aircraft right now, I'm operating on 1 engine, but my engine 2 FADEC and fail flags are inactive, which tells me that the number 2 engine is in fact operating how it should be, but I have 0 indications for that. So yeah, a little weird on the startup. I'm not a huge fan, but we'll take a break. We'll come right back. I'll have it up and running properly, and we'll taxi out and do a little flying. All right, we're back. Took a pause here. I had to change some audio settings around, and I've reloaded the game. I've probably reshot this whole portion like 5 times now. So, like I said, I'm not a content creator, YouTube guy. New to all this, and after rewatching some of the videos, turns out I had my sound volume too high, and you couldn't hear anything I was saying. So, we're going to keep that other part in. With the first attempted startup, I'm going to make a couple disclaimers real quick. So I am now, after flying around with this a little bit more, I'm fairly confident that they've modeled the 712 engines on this thing. The startup procedure is not one that I'm familiar with. I will attempt to do it once again in accordance with the documentation that Miltech has published. I still have some issues. I was able to get it to work properly finally, getting both engines to start earlier, but I do still see some problems with indications that I'm receiving on these gauges. So still got some issues with it. The startup for the Fox model or the Delta with the 714 alphas is not going to be applicable for the most part for this this version of the Chinook. So keep that in mind. Everything else functions wise should be pretty much the same outside of the startup procedure. So we're going to attempt to start this the way that they want us to. We're going to taxi it out, we're going to fly it, do some external loads. I have some more comments that I'll be talking about after that. So hopefully I fixed the audio problem and I don't have to re-record this. We're going to say that I did. So I'm going to get the aircraft set up because I've reloaded it a couple times now, making sure that we are ready for a engine start here. So we'll see how it goes. Start with the battery switch. I think I already talked through a little bit of this, but then you would do your warning alarm. 2 reds. Hate these switches. 2 greens. APU clear to start. Run for 5. Start for 2. Sounds are good. Keeping everything closed up this time to hopefully, I don't know how well it simulates the sound. Hopefully it makes it a little quieter though, and you guys can hear my voice. Alright, APU, there is the motor pump. You would, and this is I think just a thing with this sim, this Miltech sim. So I've got 24 volts of DC power on the battery bus right now. I should, when the APU exceeds 90% RPM, I should be getting an APU on advisory. I've noticed that that doesn't come on until I turn the generator on. That advisory is to let you know that you are clear to turn the generator on, so it should already be there, but I'll turn the generator on now, and there's the advisory right there, APU on. So But APU switch is on. PTUs, I've talked this to death, but now I would have hydraulic flight control power. I would do my flight control travel and hydraulics check up on 1, down on 2. Make sure that the pressure is indicated. So it would be normal on the number 1 system and 0 on the number 2 system on the maintenance panel in the back. Then I'm going to do my control sweeps, greater than 7 forward, 4 inches aft, and neutral, smooth, all 4 quadrants, no cross coupling or binding. Cross coupling, once again, is that I move the cyclic and something else decides to move along with it. Do my thrust, full up, mag brake is operational, positive ground detent, and then pedals full left and full right. They would be outside monitoring for corresponding movement on the forward nav head. So we'll get this thing ready to crank. I'm going to try to do it in accordance with their procedures here. So left main's on, cross feed's open. Move number 1 to ground, 100%. I keep forgetting to do this, so it's not really simulated. Prior to manipulating the ECLs in the real helicopter, you must turn the backup power on, do the FADEC backup power pre-start bit. Your FADEC cautions, once the backup power is on, would go inactive. It's not simulated. You do that prior to manipulating the ECLs. So 1's in ground, 100% primary on 1 and 2. And I'm going to reference their startup guide real quick. I'll be right back. Alright, once again, I had to restart the sim. I lost my mouse cursor, and apparently it's a known bug, and it ain't coming back. So I had to restart the game. Kind of back to where we were. Backup power's on. Left mains, cross feed. 1 is in ground. Took a look at their manual. We'll see how this goes. You would verify the keys in and on. I don't know if I cut the video so many times. I can't remember if I talked about it, but key is going to have to be on to initiate the exciters, which give you your spark, and your ECL position is going to control your start fuel. Look at our chrono here. Get it ready to start. Left main's cross feed, 1's a ground, 100%, primary on 1 and 2. We're going to start it now. We'll start time, looking for a good start within 45 seconds. Timer's going, starting 1, 4 seconds on the clock. And according to the manual here, you're going to wait for oil pressure to rise above 7 psi, and then you're going to advance the ECL to flight. Which, like I said, is just a little weird for me, but alright, 1 going to flight. Sounds like a good light off on number 1. All these indications are going to be incorrect. Torque is not going to go to 100%. Single engine, and just startup sounds are a little loud, so you should be able to hear me in a moment once the startup sounds stop. But NG is, or N1 in this case, is stable above 50, oil pressure above 5. Good start on 1 inside, within 45 seconds. You'll notice the NR in this is going to climb on its own. It's not going to stabilize at ground idle like it would in the real helicopter. It's just going to carry all the way up to 100%. A lot of our indications are going to be incorrect. NG or N1 should not be at 100% right now. Single engine torque would not be at 100%, probably be at 1 or 2. Oil pressure is fine, it's below any limits. It's a little high, and our PTIT is going to continue climbing all the way past all of our limits on its own, along with the rotor speed, which is just going to climb up to 100% on its own. But for this sim, I guess that's a good start on 1. Going to do the same on number 2 now. So the fuel setup is going to, we also need to turn on the number 1 generator. Once again, just totally different from the Fox model startup sequence, but the fuel remains the same. 2 is going to go to ground now. And we're going to get number 2 going. So 2, clear to start time. I've had some trouble getting number 2 started in the past, so we'll see if it works. If it doesn't, I might just have to fiddle with it a bit to try to get it started pressure is above 5 or 7 in this case. Bring that to flight. Number 1's rolling back to kind of a normal ground idle position on the N1. PTIT is no longer exceeding any limitations. The torque is relatively normal. We're already at 100% rotor speed, which we should not be. And once again, I'm getting this hung start issue on the number 2 engine. I'm not sure why, so I'm going to have to screw with this a little bit here to try to get this started. So let's see if I can just kick the starter off. It's going to fail to start on number 2 once I do this. I really, really hate these switches. Okay. Number 2 is going to roll back now. It was just hanging. I'm going to get to 0. I'm just going to try to light it off with the CL in flight to see what happens. I've got some issues with the startup here, even though it's not a startup sequence that I am used to because I have different engines in the Fox model that I fly. I'm still not seeing indications that I should be seeing. A lot of the limitations and indications are the same, even though the startup procedure is different for the Fox, and the Delta. But we'll try number 2 again, see what it does. Just keep the ECL in flight. And the engines start up. A lot more bass to the engines in real life. Let's see if they light off this time. Pressure's coming up, N1 coming up. PTIT is not moving. It's still hanging. I'm just kind of messing around right now to see if I can get it to work. We'll bring this back to ground. Flight, see what it does. Yeah, nothing. Alright, so once again a hung start on number 2. That's not actually a simulated thing in this, I can assure you. The startup sequence is just not working for me. Once again, these switches are the bane of my existence. Good God. Okay. So we'll kill the start switch again. That's going to be a failed start once again on number 2. So what I'm going to do is take a pause. I'm going to verbatim read the checklist that was published by Miltech, make sure that I'm doing it right, which I was, and see if we can figure out what's going on here. But the way that I've been doing the startup, I've had this issue every time, regardless of how I've tried to start it. I've had it work one time for me. I heard a little bit of a sound change and was actually able to get some indications here on the number 2 engine, but everything else functioned exactly the same. This Miltech CH-47D does not care. If you start the thing properly, it'll still function and fly just like it would with dual engine. So it's not modeled very in-depth at all. But stand by 1, I'm going to pause it once again, get the documentation pulled up, and try to start this verbatim. See what I'm doing wrong here to make sure I'm not the issue. I'll be right back. Alright, we're back. Both engines are running. Took me quite a while to figure out the issue. It is not annotated in the startup guide via Miltech, and it's not procedurally correct, but in order to start the right engines, the right engine rather, I was doing everything properly according to their documentation. I had to turn on the right main fuel pumps, even though I had the crossfeed open, which is not realistic. There's also engine-driven fuel pumps on each engine. Technically, you could turn all these fuel pump switches off, and the engines are still capable of drawing fuel. But the official startup procedure, and according to the technical manual of the Delta model with the 712 engines, left mains, crossfeed, which will transfer fuel from the left mains over to the right and allow successful engine start on the number 2 side. So apparently that was the issue I was having, but now I've got both engines up. You see we are, the ECLs are in flight. I'm still getting ground idle indications for N1, a little low. Super low on the PTIT. Pressure is a little high. and it's looking like my NR is at like 102, which is very high, and the NR switch doesn't function. Torque is showing basically 0, which is, it should be probably, so this is in intervals of 10. Once again, 100% dual engine is our limit, 123 single engine. At flight idle, with the thrust at the ground detent, I should probably be seeing closer to 15% dual engine torque, bring in about 20% to taxi. But we'll see how that looks. So we're going to taxi out, release the brakes, swivel switches go to steer. Once again, you don't taxi with flight controls, you just bring in the thrust, and then you steer right here on the knob. And apologies if I get if I miss some things that I thought I may have already said. Like I said, I've recorded this several times now because I don't know what I'm doing. So, but all we should be able to do, all we should have to do, is add thrust, and then we steer with this. It's not replicated in the sim. We're going to have to use the pedals, but we'll just talk about how she taxis a little bit. I also went and filled up the aircraft with fuel as well. So we'll go ahead and we can open the ramp tongue, the hell hole, and yeah. So parking brake is released. Clear forward, left, right. We'll bring in power here. Aircraft should start rolling forward due to the rigging on the fore and aft rotor system. It is. I could tell it's kind of like driving around on ice is what it feels like. I have a feeling that if I add forward cyclic, it will probably taxi more realistically, but that is not realistically what it should do. So once again, to steer the aircraft, you're using the power steering knob right here, not the pedals. The aft back of the aircraft will swing around because that's where the power steering is. The forward landing gear is fixed. And it kind of feels like I'm skating on ice right now, and that just could be a byproduct of Microsoft Flight Sim, nothing to do with these guys. But once again, torque setting, I should be at around 20% dual engine with taxi. I'm just not getting any torque indications at all, no matter where I bring the thrust lever to, and my CGI is just attached to my thrust lever in a weird way. It's not realistic. NR is a little high as well. I don't think the Inker-Dinker switches will function. No. Alright, so very limited functionality and systems modeling in this Miltech CH-47 Delta, but we'll take it through as just a quick flight, maybe do a sling load, talk about some of the things that it's not doing properly. So there are a couple, and call it good after that. So I'm just going to taxi out to the intersection here. Once again, it just doesn't feel right on the ground. Tip path plane is not correct. It sits way too low. It's probably just a limitation of the simulator, but the blades do not come down this low. And also, as I applied forward cyclic, first of all, this would be catastrophic to do this with the flight controls in the aircraft right now, but they droop way too low. It's just not what it does. So I'm gonna stomp the brakes right here, pull the parking brake handle, put the swivels back in the lock position. If I can get these switches to work, I never can. Really hate these a lot. Good Lord. Yeah, this is awesome. Okay, swivels are locked finally. Park brakes are set. Got the advisory here. Not much to do on it before takeoff. We are both on the AFCS, auto on the LCTs. Everything else is set how it should be. Fuel pumps on, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to pick it up to a hover, talk about it at a hover. The way I like to pick up in the Chinook, a little bit of aft cyclic, I like to pick the nose up first and then level the cyclic back forward as the aircraft starts to pick up off the ground. Nice smooth controlled pickup. So bringing in the power, it seems to jump off the ground pretty violently there. I'm going to take the power back out and try that one more time. A little bit of aft cyclic. It's greatly exaggerated in this, so barely any will do the trick. pick the nose up here, level the cyclic back to the neutral position, and then, yep, she picks straight up off the ground. It feels pretty realistic. I'm going to come up to about a 10-foot hover here. Feels pretty good. The sounds I'm getting, I mean, the transmission noise is relatively realistic, but I'm hearing a lot of fluctuations up and down and what sounds like rotor speed and transmission whine. That's not what you're going to be hearing. It's pretty stable at a hover, as it should be. No pedal input required or anything like that. Indications wise, still got no torque. I'm showing them at like 15% dual engine. That's not realistic at all. NR is stable at 100% as it should be. N1 or NG, looking like, try to trim this thing up a little bit here. Looking like lower than the normal operating range. PTIT is okay. Pressure's fine. Temperature's fine. Transmission oil pressure across the board is below the lower limit, so it needs to be greater than 20 psi. But that's fine. Rate of fuel burn, I'm showing I'm only burning 800 pounds per hour right now. It's probably not very realistic either. It could be a little lower on these 712 engines than what I'm used to, but I can't imagine it'd be that much lower. Alright, yep, so at a hover it's kind of like it should be. We can slide around a little bit here. So sliding to the right. Seems to feel okay. Stop the slide and back to the left. Seems to feel okay. Stop the slide. Back to a hover here. Nose left, tail right. The rate of turn is pretty realistic. Should just turn about the center hook. And nose right, tail left. I can attempt to kind of show you some of that cross-coupled hovering turns I was talking about earlier. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do them because I suck at flying and flight sims, but left pedal and right cyclic should turn me about the nose, keeping a fixed point in front of the helicopter. And I can promise you that I'm not going to be able to turn it about the tail, because that is challenging, even in a real aircraft. Without feel, it's going to be very difficult in the simulated aircraft. But the way that you would do that would be with cyclic and pedal in the same direction, kind of modulating. So you'll start off, let's say nose left, tail right, and you're going to add cyclic into that turn, kind of taking it out as you feed it in, and it should keep the tail stationary around a point and swing the nose around. It's kind of working out a little bit. But like I said, it's kind of challenging. So now we're going to take off here to the west, enter a traffic pattern. We'll do some flying and show you how it flies. Talk about some of the issues I have with this Miltech Delta model. It's coming up through 40 knots is when your turn coordination will come alive. That's what's going to keep the aircraft in trim. And I'm already completely out of trim, a full ball width right now, and it's just going to continue to get worse unless I add pedal. That is not realistic, so I'm going to have to add pedal in to straighten the aircraft up and get her in trim. It's not how it is in a real helicopter. I'm going to come up, do a little cyclic climb here, keeping my power the same, up through about 100 knots, and it's going to start going out of trim the other way as soon as I get into this turn. So bringing the cyclic to the right, the aircraft should swing the nose around on its own. That's what turn coordination is, but I am a full probably 2 ball widths out of trim right now. I have to stop the right pedal to swing the aircraft around. So this is kind of similar to how the aircraft would fly AFCS off. Way more violent and crazy though in the real thing. But you don't get that turn coordination AFCS off, so that kind of seems to be how she's flying. The CGI is not accurate. You can see here it just kind of goes up and down as I change the thrust. That's not realistic. The torque is still not indicating anything. Once again, just another realism issue. Try to bring some more power in and get this thing up to about 120. Let's see. Once again, I've talked through this, but the LCTs, they don't function in this. They would be extending as I increase my speed. The aircraft is just all over the place on the trim. But theoretically, I should be able to get to about 120, 130 knots and take the cyclic out and the fuselage stay level. And I still maintain that airspeed. So we'll see. I'm about 120 knots now, level the fuselage. Should not decelerate. So it seems like they've kind of simulated that here. So that's good. I wish there would be a little more depth on the functionality of what that means and what's actually causing it to do that. I've got a big giant climb in here. Once again, not a very good pilot in simulators. But that's good that they kind of modeled a little bit of functionality there. So basically, and it could just be the lack of tandem rotor aerodynamic modeling in Microsoft Flight Sim, but it flies like a single rotor helicopter. I take power out, I have to add pedal in one direction and vice versa, and then in the turns I'm having to follow the aircraft in the turn with trim with pedal. So it's just not how the Chinook flies really at all. I mean, they got the weight kind of down, I guess, to where it feels decent. It flies decent at a hover. But in forward flight, you're losing a lot of the functionality of tandem rotor helicopters and what makes them so unique and stable. So that's kind of a shame, but I'm going to shoot an approach here to the runway, and then we may do some external loads, and I'll talk about some other issues that I have here. So I'm going to start taking power out. I'm going to keep the forward airspeed. Once again, having to add trim via the pedals here. I'm going to slide to the right, get my lane alignment. Feed the power back in. This thing just kind of falls like a brick. It also decells very quickly. It doesn't really function like that in real life. But it's okay. Try to maintain less than 1,000 feet per minute rate of descent here, and then I'll start increasing the decel. I'm just all over the place on the trim. Once again, I'm not used to having to mess with my pedals like this in the Chinook, so that's another reason why I'm sucking. Continuing forward and down, maintain a relatively constant rate of descent and a rate of deceleration. Looking out through my chin bubble here, trying to watch my rate of closure on my VSI. I want it to get away from me and get into some settling of power, which I kind of doubt is modeled in this. And we'll continue now. We're close to the ground. Kind of hunting for the ground a little bit, which you don't want to do. And there's aft-wheel contact, forward-wheel contact. Flight controls will neutralize those. LCTs, they would program to ground. And the ground contact lights would come on in the back. I'm hearing some weird fluctuations in the engine and the rotor system that I'm not used to. Talking through a couple other issues I have real quick before we move to the external loads. We've talked about the stick position being very important, right? I'm at the ground D10 on the cyclic. I should not be able to move these flight controls like this without anything happening. But regardless of that, the Chinook is known for two-wheel taxiing, doing roll-on landings in the event of an engine failure, and our pinnacle landings. It's all very similar on the flight control inputs. I'm going to pull a little bit of aft cyclic here and add power. I should be able to pick the nose up, and the brakes are going to hold me with a nose high attitude with the aft wheels on the ground. That's not going to happen, so as soon as the nose comes up, I'm just going to roll back. Even if I use the brakes manually, it's like it doesn't, they didn't model the aft landing gear as having brakes, which they do. So there's not really a way to simulate two-wheel taxi in this properly, so I should be able to pick up, and basically if it starts to roll back, I can just kind of take out a little bit of that aft cyclic to keep the nose in the sky, but to get the aircraft rolling forward. And you can see I'm starting to slow down now. Maybe coming forward a little bit. I don't know if the nose gear is off the ground here. Tiny bit, so it kind of works, but it doesn't correlate with the proper stick position. I'm basically at neutral right now, almost a little bit forward, and the aircraft is very light on its aft gear. It's almost wanting to pick up to a hover. So there's not really a way to actually steer this forward. properly. Back taxiing is a thing that we can do, so I can just, in this case, I can add just a little bit of aft cyclic. You can roll to the back. That is a task that we do, and then you just arrest your rearward motion with a little bit of forward cyclic, keeping the power set to where it is. So you can drive backwards. I'll switch to the external view and kind of show you that. Kind of rocking back and forth. It's not really how it would be, but it's a little too light on the aft gear. But that's okay. And I'm coming back forward, just at that neutral stick position, which is not where it would be. My nose would not be off the ground if I was at neutral. You can see. You can see it's kind of wobbly left and right. It just doesn't feel right. But you know, it's okay. I'll take the power out again. I'm gonna spawn a sling load here. See how it flies with a sling load. Once you we talked about this, but the sim, their model of it, wants you to put the hook selector switch specifically on what hooks you're going to use, even though in the real world we just run it on armed and all. So I'm going to pick up, it wants me to come up to about a 25-foot hover, and let's see if I can find the sling load here. Yeah, it's saying it's 30 meters in front of me. Sorry, I'm once again not good at this. I had an issue finding this thing earlier. I don't think it spawns until you are not looking in the same direction as it, so I'm going to kind of swing the nose around here. Adding a little cyclic to keep the nose where I want it. There's the sling load at the 10 o'clock. We're going to come around the rear of it, get alignment with the sling load, and talk about some of the sling load operations. Alright, so I'm going to swing the nose back around, cyclic into the turn, just to turn about the nose a little bit. Get aligned with the sling load here, so I'm kind of sliding to the right. And I would call the sling load under the rotor disc when it was, and then my flight engineer or crew chief would hang upside down through the hell hole in the back and start calling me over the load. There'd be a hookup team on the ground if we're going to tandem this, and they're going to load the fore and aft hook. That's going to be simulated. It's just going to be automatic, of course. We're coming forward. Load's coming under the rotor disc. My flight engineer is hanging out through the hell hole. I'm going to continue forward very, very slowly. Get my altitude right here, a little low. And the load is coming under the nose now. He's going to be calling me forward, nice and slow. Once again, very slow and deliberate when doing sling loads. You got guys under the aircraft. You won't be doing any stupid stuff. Keep steady for a couple seconds here. It'll load automatically. I feel a little bit of a weight change, maybe. Should be a difference in power, obviously, but that's not. There's no power indications that are working in this. But I'm coming up to a load height of about 10 feet off the ground, which correlates to generally about 40 feet radar altitude if you're using your standard 25K sling legs. Do a hover power check, which you can't do in this because your torque doesn't make sense. But it seems to increase the weight and hover kind of like it should. It feels heavy. This sling load, this version of the Humvee that we do have, is the model is up armored. It's only showing 6,000 pounds of weight. Realistically, if it was an up armored Humvee, that would weigh about 12,000 pounds. This is kind of a configuration that a non-armored Humvee would wear, but that's fine. So we're just going to start nudging the aircraft forward. Not going to add any power or not. Not going to add any thrust, but you wouldn't know anyway because thrust and torque means nothing in this. Just nosing it over a little bit, just nudging it, doing some power management, so not increasing the thrust. And the airspeed will start to come alive. I'll start to come through ETL. The aircraft, if the aerodynamics were simulated properly, would shudder and dip a little bit, and then recover. My turn coordination would be alive right now, but it's not. I have no turn coordination in this thing. It's just all over the place on the trim. I think you can break the sling legs in this, but I will tell you that there's no physics of the sling loads modeled at all. I can do basically whatever I want on the flight controls, and it's not going to oscillate the sling load. So I'll just go external. I'll show you that one more time. You can see what I'm talking about here. It's just totally fixed to the bottom of the aircraft, so that's a shame. That would add for some pretty exciting gameplay if you could have load oscillations, because those can be quite scary and challenging. But we're just going to shoot an approach. Just come back to this taxiway off the end of the runway here. Nice and slow. We're heavy, so we don't want to get into settling with power. You got to be managing your rate of descent and your speed. Let's get the power out here. Start slowing down and coming down. Nice and slow. Get the load put back in the ground. Nice smooth rate of descent, 500 feet per minute right now, coming down through 60 knots. I don't think it's going to be simulated, but when you're heavy, as you come down through ETL, you have to add a ton of power. It's not going to be simulated. I'm just kind of able to very slowly feed the power in. A little more power. I don't want to slam the load on the ground. Once again, looks like the load is released. You wouldn't release a tandem sling load or anything like that directly over top of the load. You would make the get the load on the ground. You'd come down just a tiny bit for a little bit of slack in the slings, and then you would slide off of the load like this and then release it. That way the clevises at the end of the sling legs don't smash through the top of the load and break it, because they're pretty heavy. So you would slide offset and release it from there. But yeah, it's pretty cool that you can sling load some stuff in this. I wish they'd add a little more physics. I think it's probably a limitation of Microsoft Flight Sim once again, a little more physics to the loads, so they could oscillate and stuff on you. But yeah, I mean, it flies okay. I do have issues with the trim problem. I wish they would kind of do a little bit more in-depth simulation of some Chinook specific things, but it's, you know, very well could be a limitation of the sim. So hopefully the Fox model in DCS, I'm pretty sure that they will have a lot more accurate modeling of this kind of stuff. Do a bit of a roll-on landing here. We would do in the event of an engine failure. See how I can simulate that a little bit. Kind of hard to do. Alright, touchdown. I'd probably be a little faster in real life, but then you would use aerodynamic braking with the nose like this to slow yourself down and then bring the nose down. But can't really do it very well in here. It's probably just because I suck. But that's about it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them down below. I'll get back to you guys. Any questions for me, any Chinook related stuff, please let me know. I'm very passionate about what I do. I love flying the Chinook. It's an absolute blast. The mission's really cool. It's a great community, and I'm excited that you guys are getting to experience a little taste of it in some flight sims, and the Fox model coming to DCS will certainly be a treat. I'm definitely going to be doing some more content when that releases with some friends of mine that are also Chinook pilots and Chinook flight engineers, working on some missions and scenarios, doing tutorials and stuff like that. I don't know if I'll really come back to the Delta model in Microsoft Flight Sim. I'm not. I'm a military aviator. If I want to fly helicopters, generally I'm going to want to do it in a military setting. It's just a little more enjoyable. So I'll probably be doing it in DCS and not Microsoft Flight Sim. But if you guys want me to, if you guys actually watch this and decide that you like seeing me fly this thing terribly, then I might be open to coming back and giving it another go. Hopefully they fix a couple things that I feel like are probably bugs, specifically torque, maybe a couple other things. But yeah, I mean, decent model, decent module overall. You know, it's going to be hard for me to not point out issues that I have with an aircraft that's supposed to simulate something that I regularly fly. I know Miltech has said a couple times that due to quote-unquote licensing concerns. They didn't want to like fully simulate this thing. I've never heard of any company doing that before, or having that issue. So I don't really know, but and hopefully with the tandem rotor aerodynamics integration that's coming soon to Microsoft Flight Sim, we'll get a little bit more fidelity on some very specific tandem rotor things. And you know, maybe I'll come back and check it out after that next update to see if they fixed a couple of my problems with this. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll have a little bit more fidelity on the channel itself. Like I said, I'm not a content creator YouTube guy, so it's gonna look kind of unprofessional for now until I get some help putting things together, making it look a little bit more legitimate. But you guys can definitely expect some more content from me for Chinook related stuff in the future. So once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.